And it looks like we are live and ready now, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead and call the budget work session to order today, April 28th at 4 p.m. Looks like we have everyone, and it's all council members in attendance except for Nathan. Hopefully he'll be able to join us possibly here a little later in time. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Rachel going to drive, or I assume?
Yes, Mayor, I can take it over from here whenever you're ready.
Okay, yep, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Council, as well as our auditor, Steve Wadley, for making the time to attend a work session on the proposed FY22 budget. I'm going to share my screen because I have a PowerPoint presentation for you guys. All right, so review of the fiscal year 22 proposed budget and city services / operations. I wanted to give council a disclaimer that next year will be different with more time to discuss. I've been at the city now for a little under 4.5 months, and I've been trying to operate as fast as I can with my team to do everything from normal day-to-day operations as well as budget preparation and beyond. So for fiscal year 23, we'll have more time to go over the budget. I also wanted to emphasize to council that this is a proposed budget, so it's not 100% complete. We still need to make a few updates to the account numbers. So if you look at through all the budget documents, not every account has a number associated with it. So we have to fix that, as well as add some narratives. So you'll see that a few pages are placeholders throughout the document. And then something else to draw council's attention to is I still have not been provided firm healthcare costs for the city of Soldovia. I received an email that had an updated rate this morning, but there's still another proposed rate for healthcare costs that I'm waiting on. And so FY22 healthcare costs may change from when the actual budget is proposed for adoption on May 10th and 30th. So just wanted to give you the heads up that I used the numbers that we were given for healthcare costs in the last budget. And then also wanted to remind you guys that you can propose changes for the FY22 budget. The final version will need to be introduced at the meeting on May 10th for passage on the 30th per our code. And then lastly, we're going to cover a lot tonight. And so we can have another work session next week if council wishes, because there's a lot of material. And so I wanted to just show you the breakdown of the presentation for today. So from 4 to 5:15, it's basically going to be a quick lightning speed presentation of some of the things that I've noticed about the budget. So that way we have time for our auditor to give some insights and answer any questions from council. Then we can take a quick 10-minute break. And then part 2 will be a finance officer, Jan Yeager, presenting the proposed FY22 budget along with myself to Mayor Campbell and Soldovia City Council. So without further ado, I'm going to be talking fast through part 1. And I just ask that you save your questions for the end, unless it's really pressing, but that way we can get through all of the material and then answer any questions along with the auditor who's here. So for topics, we're going to go over how to read the budget and how it was developed for fiscal year 22, overall concerns and changes from FY21 to the FY22 budget, a quick discussion on city services and operations, a review of capital projects and the FY22 Community Assistance Program funding, a brief review of the proposed FY22 fee schedule that discusses water and sewer rates, and the last part, which is where do we go from here, thinking about council's priorities, the state deficit, reserve policies, and internal controls. All right. So how to read the budget and how it was developed. Please open up your budget document, and we can start on page Let's start on council's budget for FY22, which is page 13.
Rachel, are you going to be able to share screen the budget?
Yes, I'm gonna
Okay.
pull that up. Okay. Sorry if this document scrolling makes you a little nauseous. Let's see. All right, so here's page 13. The budget looks very different than what council's used to seeing. Every department has an introductory page, so it shows you the mission and objective of Soldovia City Council, which is the mission of the city, your functions and responsibilities, future considerations that council should take into mind and the city overall should take into mind as we move forward, some of your accomplishments within the past year or two, and then goals and objectives. And so it's just this is called a performance measure budget, and it tries to give ways that the public can understand exactly what city services they're getting. So it's a cover sheet, and then the page right below that is the actual FY22 budget. This is what I was telling you guys we'll need to update. So this is still a work in progress, making sure we have all the account numbers correctly reflected. Then you have your expenditure description, which tells you what the expense is for. You have your FY19 actual costs, your FY20 actual costs, the FY21 budget amended, which you'll be considering at your next meeting, and then the proposed FY22 budget. And so this is what we're bringing before council for consideration. And this column to the far right, that shows you the percentage of difference from FY21 to 22. And so the hope is we provide council with many different ways to view the budget. You can look at percentage difference to assess how expenses are changing. You can look at, all the way in the bottom here, the section of notes, which tries to justify some of the expenses that might need some additional context under notes. You can also look at a bar graph that shows you FY19 actual, FY20 actual, FY21 amended, and FY22 proposed. And so it's a few different ways of understanding how FY22 compares to our most recent fiscal years we went through. And so I wanted to make sure council had an overall understanding of how to read the budget document. You'll notice that this format is throughout the document, where you have an introductory performance measure sheet and then the actual budget document itself. Now you may be asking, why is it that there's bold underline expenditure descriptions and then individual accounts? And that's because I had to try and figure out or decipher how our audit, which was provided every year, compares to how the city sets up its budget. And so to try to show you what I'm saying, I'm going to pull up the FY22 budget document. Bear with me here. So council just adopted the FY20 audit findings, and the audit has a lot of really good, helpful information about the city, but this is how the auditors rank how we're doing. So you'll see council salaries and wages, employee benefits, travel training, you'll see general accounts. But in the city of Soldovia's budget document, we don't call the accounts these things. And so for FY22, I tried to loop or use the auditor's categories as headers or titles within our budget document, and then list the accounts that fall under those buckets So that way we have a way of ensuring a healthy comparison across fiscal years of how we're spending money. So again, just to show you, this is the format of our FY20 audit. And this is what our budget document looks like. And I'm going to pull that up for you guys. Let's see. So here you can see the category that the auditor calls it and our individual accounts. And the reason why this is important is because I was trying to assess a way of developing the FY22 budget that was based on actuals. And so I first had to make myself a key in order to understand the city, how the city is projecting funds in certain accounts and how that relates to our audit documents. And this might be easier to explain through an Excel spreadsheet again. So I'm going to show you one more document here. So the FY22 proposed budget is based on a 3-year average of spending in each account. And then myself and staff met and we had individual meetings to understand, is that 3-year average realistic for the upcoming fiscal year, or do we need to change it because we think that there could be a significant event or maintenance need, or perhaps we don't need to have budget in that account anymore. So the column on the left right here, that column B, these are all of the city's account names. Then column D, you see here, this is how the auditors looped up this department. And so then I had to figure out what expenses did the auditors put in these categories so that I could see how we did as a city. And so this is what the auditors, how the auditors told us we spent in 2018. And so I needed to find out what categories made up the budgeted amount of 2018. And hopefully that'll make sense as we move forward. But the reason for this was to make sure that the 3-year average that was being calculated for the budget was based on the things the auditors were grading us on, so that we had apples to apples comparison. And so again, the auditor gave a general topic of employee, or a category of employee benefits. And we predicted, or they said that we spent $29,645 according to the audit, but our budget, we predicted we were going to spend $27,852 in employee benefits. And if I click on that number, you can see what made up our budgeted prediction. So after making this key, I was then able, across 3 fiscal years, to come up with an FY22 proposed average based on the audited actuals versus what we budget. So I just wanted to share with council, that's how the FY22 budget was developed. It was based on a 3-year average of the 3 most recent audited fiscal years, as well as meeting with staff to determine how are we doing, does this need to be adjusted for FY22. Okay, back to the PowerPoint. So overall concerns and changes, these are things that I've noticed when reviewing the FY21 amended budget compared to FY22, as well as general concerns for the city of Soldovia and some changes that I'm recommending council consider for the FY22 budget. And it's a long list and they're going to appear one at a time. So we'll just take it nice and steady. The budget to actual and fund balance, FY 2010 versus FY22. I think this is, it's going to require me to pull up one more chart to show you guys. I think this is, for me, the overall concern that I would love to work with Finance Officer Yeager and council and getting better at in terms of a city and how we forecast our spending versus actual. So pulling up one graph here for your consideration. Let's see. Oh, it's actually in your packet. If you go to page 103 in your packet, I'll pull it up here on the screen. So this is a view of how the city of Seldovia has been doing in terms of budget to actual in terms of expenses. So in the blue column, this is what city administration and council came up with as an original amount for the budget for that upcoming fiscal year. So we told council in FY 2010, we were going to spend $484,483. In FY10, we actually spent $471,429. So that was a good sign because it meant that our forecasted budget matched up with our actuals. But starting in FY 2012, we were wildly off. And administration may have made end of the year adjustments that our audit documents don't reflect accurately. So I wanted to put that out on the record that perhaps the blue column, there are ordinances or pieces of legislation that amend what we thought we were going to spend. But overall, you can see that for the past 10 fiscal years, the city has been drastically overspending what was initially forecasted for its budget. So put another way, initially we thought we were going to be spending $500,000 to $550,000 when really we've been spending upwards of almost $800,000, but usually exceeding $650,000 on average for the past 10 fiscal years. Now, why is this concerning? It's concerning because when council passes budgets, it's not necessarily grounded in a reality of city expenses. And so it makes it hard to save money because you're overspending usually more than what revenue you're bringing in. And so that's hitting your fund balance. And that's what this gray line is. This gray line shows you what the city of Soldovia's fund balance is doing the past 10 years. Apparently in FY 2017, we had a negative fund balance in the general fund for negative $800,000. I'm not sure how that happened, and forgive me, both myself and the finance officer are still relatively new at the city, and so we can try to answer any questions council has or write out your questions and have you provide you answers at a later date. But overall, this is a snapshot that I hope shows council that the budgeted amounts that the city thought it would be spending for the past 10 years has been wildly off. And why this is detrimental is because if you're not pulling in enough revenue, those expenses are hitting your fund balance and it's decreasing essentially our savings. And that's pretty scary because we don't really have a reserve aside from AMLIP, which is currently restricted to land acquisitions and capital outlays to help us survive rainy days, so to speak. So I would love to discuss this further with council, but what inspired me to try to come up with this image for you was when I added up all the numbers for FY22 proposed budget, I came to $628,411, which if you just look at what council has budgeted in the past seems excessive. But when you look at what we've actually spent, which is in the orange, that's actually fairly conservative. So I'll go back to the PowerPoint presentation, but that's one of the overall concerns that I have is that the city has not been forecasting its expenses. And granted, keep in mind, there are things that happen that you can't always predict. You can't always predict a lawsuit. You can't always predict renegotiations of leases, which can cost thousands of dollars. There could be a breakdown of a piece of equipment that supports the general fund, for example, a loader. So there are one-off instances that would merit wildly high up actual expenses versus what council's budgeted. But overall, I'm noticing a trend where we are exceeding $600,000 at least on a regular basis for spending. Okay, back to the presentation.
Hey, Rachel, can I ask you just a quick question?
You bet.
Yeah, so on this one, and you'll have to forgive me because I know there's a lot of notes in this thing, but so we just said that the 3-year average, there are some one-offs here. Couple things to note in this. Obviously, I would have expected the fund reserves and the gray line with the deficit spending that we've basically been doing. I would have expected that gray line from 2018 through 2022 to dipped. I mean, at the scale of this graph, it looks like it's fairly steady. I would have anticipated that that would have started dipping back down. So I'm curious. And then the second observation is, so the 3-year average for the last 3 years of actuals would have been 699,000 and you're coming up with 628. So I'm assuming you made some adjustments throughout, like you were saying, on some of the one-offs where you decided to move some budgetary items around or decrease them.
Correct, Mayor. To answer your first question, I think the reason why you haven't seen your fund balance these past few fiscal years go down is because the city underestimated how much revenue it was going to make. And that was a chart that I didn't have enough time to prepare for you. But I think because while we overspent what we thought we were going to do for the past 3 fiscal years, we also overmade what we thought we were going to make for those past few fiscal years. So that's why I think you're seeing a flat line with our fund balance. To answer your second question, yes, general fund, I believe, has been taking more than its fair share of expenses that should have been allocated across special revenue funds. So that's one reason why you're seeing the proposed budget less than the 3-year average. And then also meetings with staff, it's not a pure 3-year average number. It's individual meetings, looking over each account. Do we need this much funding this year for this account, or can we push that project off another year? So it's having those discussions. So that's how we got to that number for FY22 proposed.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you for the summary.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna try and talk real fast here. So we just covered the concern about budget to actuals and fund balance for the past 10 fiscal years, and I'm hoping council just sees that we need to get better at forecasting our expenses. Our insurance, our general liability insurance, is predicted to increase by 10%. And if you look in your budget document, you don't need to pull it open now, but just know that I've included what our cost for FY21 was. If you go to page 107, we owed our insurance company almost $90,000. So they're encouraging us to predict a 10% increase for FY22. So that's what I did in the FY22 budget. Assessment roll for the borough, they've estimated that our property taxes for FY22 are $1 million less than they were last year, which basically means we're losing in FY22 $10,000 less in property tax revenue. Sales tax prediction, we've estimated that for FY22 to be 3% less due to COVID, also because sometimes tax revenue, you don't receive it in the fiscal year that it's billed out. Healthcare costs, you can anticipate an annual increase in healthcare costs for employees, and the rate that I was given from our current healthcare company does show that they've increased our rates. I'm hoping that this other rate I'm waiting on will show a better cost savings for the city in terms of healthcare. I hope that council, you'll see in the FY22 budget that we're using only $35,000 of the $75,000 the state wants to give us for community assistance. I hope council sees that as a good step in the right direction, because the state oftentimes wants to cut that funding. So if we were to balance the general fund or any other part of our budget with that money, the legislature or governor could decide to remove that. And so we would also be at a deficit. So the FY22 budget uses only $35,000 to balance it. You'll see in the FY22 budget the inclusion of capital projects. We have to have a dam inspection done for our reservoir. That's estimated at, I think, $10,200. Plus, they're going to help provide cost estimates for work that is much needed on the dam, according to the engineers, as well as helping us look at what it would take to repair the road to the water treatment plant, because it's washing out. And so we need to look at how we could maintain that road. Our harbor is in a deficit. It's been in a deficit the last few fiscal years. And overall, you're seeing a drawdown of the special revenue fund balances in FY22. It's mainly because we have expenses, capital project expenses, as well as special revenue funds accounting for insurance costs that normally the general fund would cover. We're in the fee schedule for FY22. We're proposing to council increases throughout the fee schedule, as well as a 1.5 increase for all water and sewer costs. This came at a study that Kevin Schoderman with Alaska Rural Water provided the city with, and that's on page let's see. That's on page 108 of your budget. If you want to read more about the analysis of our rate schedule, according to the state of Alaska, we're a low burden community, so we don't charge enough for our water and sewer, and that's on page 110 of your packet. In the past, we've used AMLIP to balance our budget. In FY20, we used over $20,000 of interest from AMLIP to balance our general fund. And so in the FY22 budget, you'll see that I'm recommending council consider the withdrawal of over $50,000 from AMLIP so that we have a balanced budget for FY22. We're also not increasing our fund balances. It's remaining stagnant, which means that we're not building up our reserves or building up our savings for the city. This is something that I've been wanting to talk to council about. We can't secure state loans because our best practices score is low. It had a 63 last quarter. Now it's down to a 52. And because of the score that we have in payroll liability, we can't secure a loan to help us offset the expenses of those lift station pumps. So that's something. Depreciation and aging infrastructure. According to our FY20 audit, our assets were valued initially at over 22 million, and now they're worth 11 million, which is kind of a wake-up call to say that over half of our assets, or the value of our assets, has decreased by half, which means everything's getting old, possibly falling apart, and so the city should be planning for replacement. And we don't have reserves to help us with replacement. Our major maintenance and repair funds in our budget, that's not actual cash. That was just earmarked fund balance. So it's not like we have a pot of separate money to help us offset capital expenses. And just a couple more items. The state of Alaska is in its 9th straight year of fiscal deficits. And the state has been doing essentially what we're doing, which is drawing interest from the permanent fund to help offset their expenses. The city of Soldovia has been doing that with AMLIP in the past. And it would be far-reaching to assume that we can get more grants to help with city operations because grants are less and less attainable and sources for funding are drying up. And so there's an attitude that local communities really need to step up and figure out how to be sustainable because everywhere there's hardship. And then the FY22 budget, a big change to help reduce costs is I'm proposing through the budget that hours reduce from 40 hours to 37 and a half. The city manager and police chief will remain at 40 hours per contract, but the rest of the city will city workers will be at 37 and a half hours, which means that the city opens at 8:30 instead of 8 as a way to save on personnel costs. And then the city clerk position has changed to a salary position. Instead of just being a city clerk, it's the city clerk slash special projects and communications coordinator. I reclassified her position based on the work that she does for the city. It's also a cost savings measure to help avoid overtime costs to the city. So it's a lot of information, a lot of things to be concerned about, and a lot of changes for FY22, but I just wanted to get that information out to council to show that it is bleak, but we can, now that we have a very clear picture of what we need to do, we can get back on track to ensure more sustainable operations of our city. Perhaps I'll save the discussion on snow removal, road maintenance, water, sewer, harbor rates in the harbor and Jackaloff for the second half of our discussion tonight. And so for the fourth part of this presentation, I just wanted to draw council's attention to capital projects and the FY22 community assistance funding. If you go to page 119 in your budget document, and I'll pull that up on the screen. Page 119 details proposal to council for consideration of how to use the community assistance program funds. We're poised to receive a little under $76,000 from the state for FY22. Like I mentioned earlier, it can be risky to balance your budget as a local city on the state funds because they're always talking about cutting them. And so I'm recommending to council that we use $35,000 of those funds to help with our escalating insurance costs. And then because council has prioritized Jackaloff Dock and establishing a fee schedule, there's maintenance, much needed maintenance that needs to happen at Jackaloff Dock. So allocating $25,000 to repair and maintenance. And then the remaining $16,000, putting that towards our Safe Roads program, road maintenance and a grader. Both the dock and the grader are in rough shape and require a lot of funding. It's estimated that the grader, if we don't get a new one, is over $30,000 in repairs. And then Jackaloff Dock, the state estimates it costs $125 a square foot to fix it. And our current dock, if we were to replace the whole thing, or sorry, $125 a square foot to replace it. So if we were to repair the whole thing, it would be over $200,000, and that's just for the floats itself. So hopefully we can come up with a Band-Aid solution to help us extend the life of our current dock. And then just bear with me. You guys are doing so good. It's a lot of information. Go back to the PowerPoint. So the fee schedule, the proposed FY22 fee schedule is included in your budget document. If you go to page 120 in your budget, You can see the amendments that have been made to the FY22 or to the FY21 fee schedule. Rates across the board have been increased. I met with the harbor master as well as the city clerk, and we looked at the current fees that are being established. Also took into consideration the expenses that are associated with providing these services to try and have fees match those expenses. And then the bigger change that comes after reading the analysis of the water and sewer rates provided by Alaska Rural Water Association is to increase the water and sewer rates by 1.5% across both utility systems. And I feel like I might be making you guys nauseous by going back between all these documents. So just know that it's at the very back of your budget document to show the proposed changes for the fee schedule. And then to finish it up, where do we go from here? Council priorities, the state deficit, reserve policies, and internal controls. I bring this up just because it may look as though we are slowly or more quickly eroding away our integrity as an organization. I was surprised to hear the auditor that presented to you guys on Monday night say that it looked like we were in good shape because he was just looking at FY20, in which case we were able to add to our reserves, but he had not looked at FY21 and the amended budget that's before you. A lot of those exceedances have already happened. And so we've already overextended ourselves through FY21. So I hope that council doesn't take what the auditor said based on FY20 to heart, because the reality is you need to look also at the FY21 amended budget as well as what's being proposed for FY22. And so this is where council priorities come in. How do you guys want to see the services the city provides come through the community based on the financial reality that we're overspending more than we're making, and we're eroding away our fund balances, which compromises the integrity of our organization? How do we accomplish these services when we typically want grants to help us fund or pay for them, when the state is in a deficit, is perpetually looking for cuts, and grant opportunities are becoming harder to receive? How does council want to resolve this issue? What can we do? How can we develop reserve policies that ensure that we save money for the city so that we're not overspending and getting rid of our savings? And then what internal controls can we put in place to help us control government spending? And so if you look on the last page of the budget document, this is a draft purchase request sheet that I still need to work with Finance Officer Yeager on. I'll pull it up here on the screen. I lost my share button, so I don't see how I can pull it up. But it's the last, literal last page of the PDF. It's a purchase request sheet that I would like to see staff start working on filling out as a way to ensure that we don't overspend out of an account. It still needs a little bit of work to make it more user-friendly, but this is one of the items I want to work on to make sure that we're not overspending the permission, the spending authority and permission that council has given administration through the budget. So, oh, thank you, Mayor. So you can see, looking at the purchasing sheet, that it has items like city budget account, line total. It requires staff to consider things like getting 3 bids to make sure that the price of a larger asset or item is competitive. Something that I would like to see on here is how much money is left in the account. It makes a staff think about things like freight expenses, any contractual agreements to attach them, so that way we have a good paper trail for the auditors when they review these materials. So this is what I hope to be a step in the right direction of better governmental control on spending. So on that note, done talking. Would love any questions or feedback from council, as well as any insights, because the auditor has been listening all along. So Steve, if you have anything you want to contribute, the floor is yours, as well as with council. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm sorry to talk so fast. Just a lot of ground to cover.
Can everyone hear me?
Yep, we got you loud and clear, Steve.
Okay, I'm in Bethel and my internet connection's kind of hazy, so hopefully I don't get cut out here. But so I just wanted to emphasize, I've been kind of working with Rachel. She had some concerns over the budgets and whatnot. And I like the new approach that she's using to the budgets, actually looking at the historical trends, which I think in the past, that really hasn't taken place, as far as, looking at the past 3 or 4 years, figuring out how much it really costs to, for example, to run the general fund versus your budget. I know in the past, budgets have kind of been like, oh, okay, well, we'll start with last year's budget, and then we'll add 2 or 3% to the budget, and that's our adopted budget. And what Rachel has been doing is going back and looking at the actual, which is a very important part in setting your budgets, is to look at the actuals. Because if you just base it on prior year budget and we're going to increase it 2 or 3%, you have no idea what you're actually spending, for example, in the general fund. So looking at that analysis is very important part of, setting budgets and whatnot, making sure that you're looking at, is there ways that we can cut costs? Is there ways that we can increase revenue? Is our expenses going to go up? And, have that reflected in a realistic budget. One of the things that I was talking to Rachel about, that I was concerned about, was setting a reserve. Right now, like Rachel said, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was around 23 million was your capital assets, and there's only about 11 million left that haven't been depreciated yet. So your buildings and equipment and docks and everything are getting old. It's important to, set rates when you're looking at, water, sewer, harbor, anything that you generate some user fees. Those user fees you should have enough money in the user fee to cover your cost plus an estimated amount of reserve. And when I say reserve, I'm talking like a rainy day fund. And that would be, because you have to start thinking about the equipment that needs to be replaced. And so you have to look at it more than just fund balance. Really, what really needs to be done at the city is that there needs to be a cash reserve, a separate account that is used where this money is deposited. So for example, when you want to replace a loader and it's time to replace that loader, you actually have cash available to replace that loader, instead of relying on the AMLET funds to pay for these costs. And so, when you're analyzing the rates that should be charged for, these programs that have user fees, it's important to look at, the actual costs that are happening. Look at a historical trend. Make your known, if your insurance is going up, that needs to be incorporated into the budget. But actually setting a reserve account. So I guess, from an audit side of things, it's real important. I've seen cities before, like, well, we have our fund balance is growing each and every year, but then you look at their cash balances, and they equated the fund balance being their cash balance, and their cash balance did not reflect what was in fund balance. So one of the things that I would suggest that the city, think about implementing, a cash account that's restricted, that needs council approval, and where some of these excess funds will be, deposited into this account that is basically, used for replacement of equipment and whatever you need for your infrastructure. And so that way, when something happens, you have the cash available to make sure that you guys can pay for that. I want to, I think Rachel is on the right track. I know in years past, there's no one's really, I don't think, has looked too closely at, budget to actual, to see what you guys were really spending the money on. We put it in a footnote in the financial statement showing, what functions in the general fund were over budget. But, there probably needs to be a good plan going forward as far as trying to increase revenues as much as you can, and look at ways of decreasing expenses and creating this reserve fund. If you guys could get your scores up, Todd Larson, who used to be your guys' city manager, went to the city of Dillingham, and they obtained this a portion. They attained a loan that was partially subsidized, and it was subsidized about, I want to say it was around 40% of the loan that is basically forgiven. So if you guys can get that score up as far as your water and sewer, it would open up some opportunities for, some emergency cash instead of, just using the AMLET. So, and I don't know, I know I was traveling out here to Bethel on Monday, so I was not able to do the presentation with you guys on Monday. But in reality, I have the financial statements here. You had 962,431 in cash and cash equivalents at the end of FY20. But in reality, once you subtract out the AMLET balance, that's supposed to be for your permanent fund, you guys really only have about $300,000 in available cash. So, setting up a restricted cash account for this rainy day fund, I think, is going to be critical moving forward as your infrastructure ages, and you need replacements to come up. Then you'll have the cash to pay for it. Is there any questions related to that?
Mr. Mayor, if I may ask a question. Oh, there we go.
Yep, go ahead, Vivian.
Okay, yeah. If you could just, thank you for your presentation. If you could just explain a little bit closer on, if you have a fund balance, how does it grow if you don't have any cash balance? Could you clear that up? It's kind of like fund balance versus cash balance. If you could clear that up, because I'm sure I'm not the only one on the council that's a little bit confused about that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, fund balance, it kind of goes over going back to accounting 101, but what makes up the balance sheet is you have assets, and then you have liabilities, and then you have fund balance. So whatever's in fund balance, you have to, in assets, it's more than just cash. You have accounts receivable, you have inventory, that make up your assets. And then those assets, you have to pay for your liabilities, which is, your accounts payable, your payroll liabilities. Some of it sits in unearned revenue. If you have a grant, you can't use that money unless it's for grant expenses. And then what falls to the bottom line after all that is fund balance. So, fund balance doesn't always equate to cash because you have other assets. That cash balance has to pay for all your liabilities that are on the books. So when you look at a balance sheet is that moment in time. It's not a period in time. It's like, when we do your guys' financial statements as of 6/30/20, it's exactly what on June 30th, 2020 versus your income statement, where that fund balance either increases or decreases, is based on, your fiscal year. So it's a period of time, and a balance sheet is a moment in time. And so, generally, related to fund balance, I know I might be making this harder to understand, but, you got to understand that cash isn't your only asset.
Steve, if I may,
Yes.
an example that you had given me that was very helpful in understanding that concept is that, for example, we send out our annual mortgage bills, and I think for FY21 it came to about 117,000. And so when everything falls to the end of the year, revenue expenses say, we had $116,000 in expenses and our revenue was 117. You would see $1,000 possibly as fund balance, but that doesn't mean that you tangibly received the cash for the annual mortgage bills. That money could have actually come in the next fiscal year. And so fund balance is basically like, I think of it as like how it works out on paper, but people pay things late, or they don't pay it at all, or they pay it in advance. And so that to me seems more of the cash balance, whereas the fund balance is how it kind of works out on paper. I don't know, Councilmember Rojas, if that helped.
Yes, absolutely. Both of your input. Thank you.
Yeah, and that was a very good way to put it, because you have accounts receivable. And so, if you have a customer that's not paying their bill and their balance just grows and grows and grows, well, that adds to revenue, but that doesn't equate to cash coming in. So, if you have a customer that's not paying, yes, GAAP accounting says you've earned that revenue, but that revenue hasn't equated to cash just yet until the customer pays their bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other questions for Steve?
Mayor, if I may.
Yeah, you bet, Rachel.
So Steve, when Andy gave his presentation to council regarding the FY20 audit, he kind of left us with the impression of, oh, your fund balance has grown, so it looks like you guys are on the right track. But he hadn't taken into consideration the FY21 amended budget, which as amended shows that we're drawing down over $8,000 from our fund balance in order to make things line out. And I just was wondering if you could comment on what council could look for in the future to show them that they're on the right track. I kind of like how you, or I do like how you hit on trying to figure out how to increase revenues, reduce expenses, and then create a reserve account with actual cash for emergency or rainy day spending. But if there's any way, I don't know, you could correct the impression that we're on the right track, because I do think that we're operating at an unsustainable level currently.
Yes. So, a good way to do that, if you have, like I hit on kind of earlier, is if you have a realistic budget, right? And your general fund is going over budget each and every year. A way to control that is, through, is to set a realistic budget and then make sure that expenditures do not exceed those amounts without having council approval for those. And that's the way, comparing your budget to actual is the way that you're really going to, help control cost and look at that. Yes, I realize that, an emergency situation might happen, a disaster in Soldovia might happen. And, but when those things do happen, it's important to make sure that, the council is aware of these things. And then at that point in time, if there's an emergency that, let's just say that, it's going to cost an extra $200,000 that wasn't anticipated in the budget. That's when you go to the council and say, hey, we have this emergency situation. It wasn't anticipated in our budget. We need, we need to do a budget modification and figure out how we're going to pay for this. But I think if you're monitoring the budget versus the actual and adhering to the budget, and if you exceed that budget amount by a certain percentage, it needs to go to council for their approval, informs everyone. And then I think that whole process will help to control some of the cost. And, the costs, have kind of gone through the roof. I mean, you guys spent a lot of money on Casale, and you spent a lot of money on training for Casale and the tech support for Casale. And that system just did not work for the small city that it was in. I mean, we have plenty of cities that use that software, but they also have a huge accounting department, and not one person has to learn that whole program. And so that whole thing was pretty much, I hate to say it, but a waste of money, because now you guys are reverted back to QuickBooks. But, looking at your budget versus your actual is the best way that you're going to be able to control cost.
Thank you, Steve.
Any other questions for Steve? Okay, Rachel, you're back up.
Well, we could always have our 10-minute break sooner. And so we can take a 10-minute recess and then go on to part 2. And Steve, you are more than welcome to keep tuning in and listening, although I know you're in Bethel and I've already done a full work day. So totally understand if you have to bow out. We're all really grateful that you were able to participate this evening.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. We really appreciate you explaining that to us. Yeah, why don't we do that then? Let's go ahead and take.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Yep, let's go ahead and Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break then, and then we'll come back and continue on with part 2.
Sounds good.
We'll just stay logged in, Heidi.
Yes, that's fine. We'll just stay logged in here and we're still live and streaming, but we'll mute our devices and come back here in 10.
Heidi, do we have everybody back or are we still waiting?
Sorry, we were double
You're on
muted.
mute.
We have everybody back in the room. I'm not sure about Vivian and Harmony, but
here.
everybody in the room is here.
I'm here, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Okay, sounds good, Vivian. Yeah, why don't we go ahead and get started then? And Harmony's here too, so perfect. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started then, Rachel?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to turn it over to Finance Officer Yeager to walk us through the proposed FY22 budget. If you have the budget printed in front of you, you want to be on page 10.
Good evening, everybody. So yeah, I'm just gonna just kind of go through the budget a page at a time, and we're gonna start with on page 10. On the top, about 2/3 of that page is the anticipated revenues. You can see that they are generally fairly in line with the 3-year averages. The one area that really does kind of is a change, and City Manager Friedlander already addressed this, is the revenue sharing, the community assistance, rather than budgeting for the entire 75,000. We're actually taking that down to 10,000, just so that we're not so reliant on that.
Oh, Jan, 10,000 for the general fund. Overall, we're taking 35,000 to balance the city's budget with, and 10,000 goes to the general fund, and then the rest of the special revenue funds, so water, sewer, harbor, dock, and haul out, those all have a portion of community assistance funds.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, so this is really just kind of looking at the general fund on this page. Sorry about that. And so you can again see that we're trying to be fairly conservative with the revenues. One area that you'll see that there is a bit of an increase from FY21 is under the rents and leases, and down in the notes you can see where that number comes from. And so that's one of those where we feel like we have we don't have to do quite as much guesstimating as we do on some of the other revenues. And so there's pretty good support for that increase of 10,500 there over FY21. And so generally we've got an anticipated revenue of 628,411, and then the balances with our total anticipated expenditures for the general fund. And then for more detail as to where those expenditures come from, that's where we look at the sheets that City Manager Friedlander showed you, the City Council as an example. So you can see on page 11, when we look at the expenses versus revenues, at this point we're aiming for a genuine balanced budget here. And then also on 11, you can see kind of the breakdown in the general fund of where the expenses are. And so Public Works continues to be our biggest expense in the general fund, and then admin at 22%, council fairly close at 19%, and then police department after that. One thing that you will notice in here that's in there as a category that has not existed before is the multi-purpose building. We're proposing to look at this building as a whole rather than breaking out expenses for utilities, telephone, etc., across the different user groups as we have before. It's just kind of a more accurate way to see what the actual costs of this building are, because we can see them as one group rather than trying to pull together little bits and pieces from the different departments or different classes. And so as we go through it, you'll see, just like council has a page, admin has a page, the multi-purpose building now has its own page as well. The other two things you might notice is that Soldovia space is not in here, and also the library is not in here, and that's because the expenses for those two areas are all basically encompassed by the multi-purpose building. And then Parks and Recreation has also been taken out, and that's being absorbed by Public Works. So if we want to turn to page 12 and 13 and look at the City Council, Page 12 is basically just the missions, objectives, etc. So the actual numbers start on page 13. One thing that you may notice, the administrative fees have been taken out and more has been put in toward wages and salaries. Basically, that's so that we're not charging ourselves to work for ourselves. And City Manager Friedlander can explain it a little better than I can there.
Thank you. So administrative fees are basically charges for services, and usually you see them in special revenue funds or enterprise funds, where funds that are sustained by user fees. So for example, our administrative assistant, Diane Gruber, helps with water and sewer billing, speaking to water and sewer customers, arranging appointments, helping myself and public works staff manage water turn-ons and turn-offs. And so a portion of her salary is considered an admin fee that's charged against water and sewer, versus me as the city manager, wages and salaries within the general fund. I don't charge a fee to serve council. It's accounted for under wages and salaries. So I hope that nuance makes sense. Admin fees, you typically see them. It's a portion of someone's wages, but they're providing a service to a fund that generates its own revenue. And so it tries to create the most realistic picture of what it takes for that special revenue fund to run. So another example, Finance Officer Yeager supports the senior meals program. So 5% of her time, it's estimated, is spent on that program, supporting and supervising staff, helping with ordering meals and menu preparation. And so she charges a portion of her time as an admin fee to the senior meals program.
Okay, thank you. And I guess as you kind of look down the columns and especially look at the FY21 versus FY22 proposed, the areas where you see large differences, some of those are explainable by COVID. For instance, in travel per diem, you can see that in FY21, obviously we weren't really going anywhere. And so travel was considerably lower. And then in FY22, we're proposing to bring it back. So it's a little bit more in line with what it's been over the years. Another area that you'll see a fairly significant difference is in liability insurance. This was another one that was spread out more across the classes in the general fund. We were pushing a lot more of the liability insurance onto some of the special revenue funds, since they, as City Manager Friedlander mentioned earlier, there are services that potentially incur a fair bit of liability. And then in the general fund, we're moving a lot of those basically to council. So it's not so much that our insurance and liability has increased so much for council, it's that we're reallocating where those costs are. And so you'll see that cost increase in council, but then you'll see a corresponding decrease in other departments. Kind of the same thing there with audit fees and legal, contractual, etc. There's just more being put on the council budget, but then it'll be lower in other areas of the general fund. So anyone have any particular questions on
Jan, I have a quick question. I have just a quick comment. So a good example of that obviously is the account number 7920, the PERS liability. It looks like we weren't capturing any so the PERS liability, that percentage of, or that dollar amount of 5,912 probably goes up against either some of the the salaries and wages, I assume, up above. That's the correlating percentage that the PERS liability would come over with the salaries and wages.
Exactly.
Where it just wasn't tracked before.
Exactly.
Or it wasn't accounted for under council before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have any other questions about the council budget? Okay. So moving on, as we look at administration, this is again primarily the city manager, city clerk, finance department. So you see several pages there. One once again, you're going to see that same grouping of wages and salaries together and the admin fees having been removed. As I'm looking down, one of the areas that we're seeing a fair increase is on heating fuel and power, so utilities. And I am going to turn to City Manager Friedland for that explanation of that increase.
Let's see if we accounted for it in the notes. So we try to use the notes to help us keep track and see if utilities is included in there. I don't see it. Let's see if I can remember.
Sorry to put you on the spot there.
No, it's okay. I think because the city of Soldovia allocated utility costs based on a percentage. And so we reviewed those percentages and took into account what it takes to operate the city hall office. So I believe that cost for administration is specifically related to the city hall office, including, I believe, a portion of the warehouse for public works. And then if you look at the public works budget for utilities, that's trying to account for streetlights, other utility costs aside from the city hall office and possibly a portion of the warehouse.
And then also on this page is a good example of where you see the costs that were increased in the council budget then are balanced out here. So you can see that insurance, liability, audit fees, legal, et cetera, those have all been zeroed out. And so that's where some of the balance is happening.
And if I may comment on that, it's because the city attorney serves council. They're one of the only employees that's appointed directly by council. The audit fee assists council with the, not accreditation, but the accuracy of the budget. And then the insurance liability for council, it's all put in council basically to try and give you guys one spot to see these expenses and how they're hitting the general fund rather than spreading them across the different general fund departments, which could make it harder to see the expenses associated with those services.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, I guess I'm, of course, confused. Are we on page 18?
Yeah.
Okay, so that operating budget is just for the finance department?
That's all of city administration. So that's
Pardon?
that's all of the administration of the city. So that's not just finance, but that's also a large portion of Rachel's time, Diane's time, Heidi's time, etc.
Okay, so it was for FY 2019, it was 13,000 plus. Then it went to 51, then it went to 39, and then it went to 70 now.
And for everybody else, Councilmember Sweat is looking at salaries and wages under the administration department. So the way that the city determined salaries and wages in the past was by a percentage allocation. So they would take into consideration where the city manager was spending their time, where the finance officer, where the city clerk was, and they would use that. And so you're seeing a difference in FY22 because we're changing the allocation that was initially done in the past. And you can see if you look under notes, wages and salaries, it includes the labor provided by the city clerk, finance officer, city manager, IT support, which is Radzie's time, SOC staff. So that's why it's also high, because the city SOC employees are the city employees, and their salaries alone, I believe, are over $42,000 for the three people, plus all of their benefits, and then the safety officer. And so that's why it's so much higher than what council has seen before, because I can guarantee you I don't think the SOC employees' time has been reflected in the budget like this before. Yeah, they're proposing for FY22 to have the CIRSA board proposed 3 people. And so then the city helps hire those employees. And then the borough gives us money to pay for the full cost of those employees plus an admin fee.
We can't hear anything. You guys need to turn your mics on.
Sorry, Jeremiah, I was just saying before it was all the employees' time
No
was
worries.
broken down per department. So,
Yeah, that's correct. Our it depended on the position, but especially the administrative positions were broken out across the classes, the special revenue funds, et cetera. And so the amount of our time in any one class was quite small generally. And so this is kind of reflects a change to that as well. Any other questions about the administrative budget at the moment?
I just have one more. I hate to bring it up. Are we still paying for Cassell?
At this point, we have a contract with Cassell. We are obligated to maintain access to that data for several years.
Right, I remember you saying that.
Right, and so we need to maintain our ability to access Cassell and access the data. And so we have a contract that we've worked out with Cassell so that basically the fees that we had already paid this year, they are crediting us until the end of calendar 2021. So basically through the end of December, we don't have any more fees for them. And then starting in January of 2022, we'll pay $200 a month,
$200 a month,
which is
okay.
much better than the $1,226 a month we were spending. And that will enable us to continue to access that data
Right.
until either the time period has passed so we no longer need to access it, or we find some other more efficient way of preserving that information.
And we hadn't found that yet, obviously.
We have not yet, no.
Okay, all righty, thanks.
And Councilmember Sweat, you can see that too. If you look at the notes under software fee, you'll see we put Casella's $200 a month. So we budgeted $1,200 to cover us January through June. And then that got spread out. All of the software fee expenses got spread out amongst the various departments. So you'll see that note here, split amongst general fund, water, sewer, harbor, boat haul out, and dock.
Wasn't there at one point when Casell was going to reimburse us or give us leniency on a payment for their initial mess up on getting the? Seems like I remember somewhere we were working on getting reimbursed or
I've heard
something
reference.
honored.
I've heard reference to that, and I tried to track that down. I was never able to find anything in writing. And I also spoke with the previous city manager, and she was, if I recall correctly, and I don't always, I don't believe that she was aware of that arrangement. But I tried several avenues to find something in writing about that and was never able to.
Yeah, I don't think, unfortunately, it was anything in writing. I think it was just, I think they just said. But, well, anyway.
I think there was some reference made to it at a couple of the meetings when
Right.
we asked questions. And then, so the credit that we're seeing now is just for the it's just basically, it's for the rest of this year until we start accruing again. That credit is basically for the contracted amount that we have, but basically since we're not using it, they're crediting it, and then we'll start with the $200 a month storage fee in January.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any other questions about the admin budget? Okay. So if we look at page 21 is the Soldovia Police Department expenses. Here you're going to see a very large difference between FY21 and FY22. That's because we looked at the federal management guidance for the CARES Act, And of course, one of the things that we want to be very careful at with the CARES Act money is that the expenses that we are claiming are allowable under the federal guidelines. And one of the federal guidelines states that public safety officer expenses are 100% allowable under the CARES Act. And so that's one of the things that we did was we made some adjustments. And so we claimed, I believe it was all of Officer Cushman's time for FY21, and then nearly all of Officer Hawkins or Chief Hawkins' time for FY21. We put that toward CARES Act. And so and then of course we also had about 2 months where we didn't have any a chief in place, and that was a great savings as well. We certainly hope that we don't have that situation in FY22. We want to be paying an officer every month. And so you'll see that there's administrative fees and wages and salaries. That's basically time that other employees charge to the police department. But all the chief's wages were put to CARES Act. Obviously, we don't foresee having that same pot of money going forward in FY22. And so that's why the wages and salaries and then also the benefits go up there. And kind of skimming down, you'll see then again the balancing act with the multi-purpose building. So if you look under utilities, in FY21, $9,300 worth of utilities were allocated to the police department. Going forward in FY22, we zero that out and then just keep those utilities in the multi-purpose building account instead. Liability insurance, again, more of that's been moved onto the police department just by the nature of the work. That's just a higher liability area, and so it made more sense to allocate more funds to that.
And Jen, if I may add to that too, the amount that you see for police for insurance liability, that's specifically related to police and crime coverage. So our insurance company is most likely going to assess us $13,210 just for having police and an officer. So it's not related to general liability for the city. It's just specific to having police.
Thank you. And then again on the although these are smaller amounts under dues and fees and so on, you can see where software fees, payroll expenses, those type of things that were previously allocated out across the classes, those have been moved out of that budget.
Excuse me, who's ever running the screen? Could they scroll down, please, so I can see the bottom of it? Thank you.
Okay, any other questions about the police budget? Okay. So if we're going to jump ahead to page 26, we can look at the volunteer fire department. And this is just the fire part of that department. And here you can really see where moving the multi-purpose building into its own class makes a huge difference. And so our FY21 budget amended for the fire department was just under 26,000, and then FY22 we're proposing just over 5,000, and that's because again taking all the utilities, contracts, that type of thing out of that department, and just really looking at what are the particular fire related duties and so on. And so it's the safety officer, wages and benefits, a little bit of repairs and maintenance, because that is one expense that the city does take on for the department, is maintaining the vehicles, fuel, etc. And then just a little bit of freight, and that's really about it. So it's greatly simplifying the fire. And then as we look to EMS, you'll see the same thing. Taking that budget from 25,600 again to just over 5,000. So we probably kind of look at those two departments together since they're so similar. Does anyone have any questions about what we're doing with fire and EMS?
Yeah, Jan, real quick on training. Is training rolled up into salary and wages on this?
Training fees for fire and EMS are
captured somewhere else.
Training for fire and EMS, training is generally covered by the department itself. It has its own revenue, its own pots of money. And so the city doesn't generally pay training expenses. I know a little bit of training did get charged to the city in FY21 that should have been CARES Act related. I think it was like $25 or something. I suppose I should actually look at $50, I guess. But generally that's funding that's covered by the department's own separate revenue rather than the general fund from the city.
Okay.
Same thing
you.
with ambulance supplies, the medications and so on. Those are not purchased by the city. Those are purchased by the department. Does anyone have any questions about fire and EMS? Okay, so if we look at page 31, that takes us to Public Works and Maintenance. Let's see. And you'll have to forgive me. Some of these I have not spent as much time looking at as as I should have. I know there's a fairly significant difference between FY21 and 22 on the grader. That's I think largely covered by the grader. Had some rather expensive tires that were purchased this last year. We hope have some life left in them. Again, you can see heating, fuel, telephone, internet were fairly significant costs for public works that are being absorbed into other areas this year. Other than that, the budget is relatively straightforward on that compared to FY22. Not a lot of major changes.
So on wages and salaries, we went up 20 grand. We're proposing 20 grand more under wages, directly under wages and salaries. And then the admin fees, that's where the larger increase was at, from 8,000 to 31,000. Is that just because more time is obviously spent dealing with public where I take it a bunch of that might be Diane's time?
I think Diane's going, I'll let city manager address that.
So I have Mayor Campbell pulled up the notes regarding the wages and salaries as well as admin fees. I think you're seeing an increase in personnel costs because we've bundled up Parks and Rec, custodial, garbage collection, and I'm not sure how those were spread out across the departments in the past, but we determined that Public Works General Fund Department is the most appropriate place to put those expenses. And then for admin fees, we have 15% by the city clerk, 15% by the finance officer, 10% from the harbor master, and 15% from the city manager. And that's based on looking at how much time we spend serving Public Works staff general fund expenses. Diane's time isn't coded to this, it's coded to water, sewer. That makes up 60% of her time, and I can't harbor a few other departments, and you'll see it in the notes. That's what makes her a whole position.
Yeah, and then just to reiterate one thing that
Okay,
the
thank
city
you.
manager mentioned is that the Parks and Recreation is also being folded into Public Works. And so that salary that previously would have been included in Parks and Recreation, which you can see was $9,100 in FY21, that would be included in Public Works now rather than in Parks and Rec.
So it's the parks, sorry, may I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is the Parks and Recreation, is that the work that they're doing to maintain or maintenance and stuff like that in the parks around the community, or is that what that is?
Right. So last year, for example, we had Amanda Miller as our Parks and Rec person, and she spent time doing some beautification work. She spent time monitoring the RV park, collecting fees, um, working on Lollipop Park, a lot of the improvements that were done there. But then she also worked very closely with our maintenance staff. And so there was just a lot of times it's kind of gray as to what is public works and what is parks and recreation. And so it just made sense basically to just fold it into one department. And so that's why when you look at the next page on page 33, you can see that parks and recreation has been zeroed out for FY22. And so that's part of the reason that there is that increase in wages and salaries for public works, is because it is encompassing that seasonal position as well.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't even realize that we had a Parks and Rec position previously.
Yeah, it's a pretty quiet position most of the winter. So. Any questions on public works or parks and recreation?
And if I may make a comment to council, you will be discussing the FY21 amended budget and considering its adoption at your next meeting. So right now we're talking through FY22, which you have the ability to change items on, but you can also change proposals for FY21. So for example, when you look at Parks and Rec, you'll see that there's a very high budget for wages and salaries that's proposed for FY21. That's to help council accomplish your beautification projects, your priorities, help with brush work. We have alders growing on our septic tank. So we need help with clearing out the brush from the right-of-ways to help, as well as other maintenance. So you guys can decide to reduce what you see in the FY21 amended budget column still. So it's not set in stone. You haven't passed the ordinance yet to accept the amended budget. So let's just say, after looking at the financial status of the city, you don't want to hire someone to help with beautification. We want to spread thin our public works staff and have them do everything under the sun and not, we don't have to hire someone to help us with beautification. They can instead help with right-of-way maintenance. I'm not sure what else the summer entails, like pulling out tables. I mean, they already do all of that, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that you can still change what you see in the FY21 budget amended column.
Yeah, can I make a comment? Yeah, see, and that's what's so that's what's very frustrating is, I mean, the two guys can only do so much. Are you going to take them away from the water treatment plant and from whatever else they have to do to cut brush? I mean, you can't do that, so we're kind of between a rock and a hard place. We kind of have to hire somebody, or we have to ask for volunteers. And tell you the truth, I think we're volunteered out, with people. Everybody has, especially in the summertime, everybody is so busy that I think it's going to be very difficult to get volunteers to do some of these little things. It would be nice if we could, but I think we're going to end up having to hire. You've advertised the position already, haven't you? Haven't? I mean, I think Amanda did a whole bunch of stuff last year that I don't see how those guys could have done it all. We got much more stuff to do this year. It's just, yeah. Anyway, thanks.
It seems like I see the maintenance vehicles at the Harbor Masters several times a day, or sometimes there for a long stretch of period of time. Is that where they get their orders from Layla?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Morrison, you'll see, if you look at the Public Works budget on page 32, under admin fees, Harbor Master, you'll see that the general fund helps support the Harbor Master position by 10%. When I came into the position, I was told that Our harbor master was also a forewoman for Public Works. She helps with ordering, talking through projects, materials, helping actually with Public Works activities. So I check in with Public Works staff every Monday morning and then at the end of the week. But then Layla helps with overall daily, what do you need? I can help you. How can I help you do this kind of work?
And also through the mayor, in recent weeks, they have been there quite a bit just because they have been working on the finishes of the kiosks in the harbor there. So you've probably seen their vehicles there quite a bit as that project kind of gets ready and those buildings get ready for rent.
And if I may, I do believe that they're working on turning on water right now too, which is a big project at the harbor.
Looking at page 35, this is our multi-purpose building. And so you can see that this is strictly the operating expenses of the building. There's no wages, salaries, any of those additional costs. It is strictly supplies, utilities, etc. A bit of money for potential repairs, freight, etc. So it's basically just a way to capture the figure of what does this building cost the city per year. Mr. Goldberg.
Ask the price of fuel this is at 15,260 for 22. Currently the fuel is $3.25 a gallon, 3.23 I think, and by the end of this year the price per barrel is going from what we got it at, which was $10 below the price, $22 a barrel. It's going to be over $100 a barrel in 8 months in the winter. So you might need to up the heating fuel. If you look back a few years at the prices of fuel, the cost is going to more than double from what it was this last year. So that's just, unless some miracle happens, then they can get control of the market again. Thank you.
Well, that's a little bit of encouraging news, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we'll have to check some industry analyst information and maybe look at some, talk to the suppliers, talk to a supplier and find out, what they're anticipating to make sure that, we're in line, that is actually going to happen. So it looks like everything, fuel's been all over the place here the last couple of years for sure.
And Mayor, if I may, we did look at expenses for utilities over the past few years. And I can't recall what average price per gallon we budgeted for. I think it was either $4.50 or $5.50. And our expenses generally fell in line with what you see proposed for FY22. So this could be an item where when we do a mid-year adjustment in December or January, we can consider upping it then based on the feedback we get from the fuel costs and what we know about them increasing during the winter.
Yeah, it's probably a good idea.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask a question?
Yep, go ahead, Harmony.
So going back actually to the Public Works, I was just thinking about what you guys have budgeted for training. I know that both of your current employees are still working towards their certifications for our water treatment and sewage certs. I was wondering if they are receiving or pursuing other types of training for their positions, like I don't know, with the just the operations of the day to day going on here in the city, do we allocate, allow for, or have money intended for that to support our staff in that way?
We do allow for that. So this training budget of $300 is specifically for public works, but the water and sewer and so on, those actually do require a fair bit of training, and those are accounted for in those budgets in the special revenue funds that we haven't looked at yet. Did that? And I'm
Yes,
sorry,
that's
Councilmember
great.
Payton. Does that answer your question? Because I was having a little trouble hearing you.
Yeah, sorry. These funky headphones. No, that's great. That's what I was wondering. Just it's that $300 didn't seem like enough to cover, what they should be, the type of support I thought that they should be getting for their positions. But if you have that accounted for elsewhere, then yes, that answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah, that is specifically for the portion of their role that is for public works, and so you will see training and allocated in the other budgets as well. Looking at page 36 on Seldovia space, you'll see that this looks quite a bit like Parks and Rec in that we do not have any money allocated for FY22. Our expenses for Seldovia space are basically maintenance and repairs and utilities, phone, heat, power, etc. And so those have been, most of that has been folded into the multi-purpose building, and then a little bit of, repairs, maintenance, etc. that's been folded into public works. Have any questions about Seldovia space? And you will notice that the repairs and maintenance were relatively high in FY21. That a lot of that was because of the LED light project, so that should be a fairly one-time expense for that project.
How many spaces do we have
What
rented
is
out
our-
at this point?
I'm trying to think. So we have we've got Dr. Marlowe, we've got Kathy Fy, we've got Wellspring, and we've got Hurley House. So we've got 4, and then we've got Radzi receives a small space for which he doesn't exactly donate his time, but he does a lot of work with the administration and maintenance and so on of Seldovia space in exchange for that office. So we don't incur costs for his time for that. And I'm not sure if there's any open spaces right now or not.
Yeah, Pearlie, we have one empty space.
So what is our current cost of maintaining that space versus how much we make? What is our overhead on those spaces right now?
Councilmember Payton, so if you go, let's see, back to right where the general fund expenses to revenues was discussed. So it looks like that's page 10 in your budget. You'll see rents and leases. The Seldovia space tenants pay total $9,420 annually. And then we're going to start charging sales tax because that was a great catch from the finance officer that we haven't been charging sales tax for those leases. And so that'll bump that number up. So I guess let's just round it up to 10,000, it's estimated to cost $36,000 to run that building aside from the senior meals portion. And we bring in $10,000 of revenue to help offset the cost of Seldovia space. Then you also have SPD in there, fire, EMS, the library. And so the question for council is $10,000 a fair amount of revenue to bring in, considering Seldovia space is a significant portion of the building, but yet you have a couple tenants that don't pay any rent at all to use the space, which is the library and Chamber of Commerce, I believe, has space in there. And then you also support other general fund activities through public safety.
I don't know that putting the entire cost of the building on your renters is a fair way of doing business down there. Does the library, do they get any type of grants that help fund that space? Do they pay any type of rent at all, or how does that shake?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Peyton, I just wanted to say, I like your first comment. I agree. I don't think Seldovia Space tenants should be paying for the whole operation of the building. And then it looked like the city clerk may have insights, nope, on the library, but no, they don't contribute any rent in terms of the operations of the space. They get grants, I believe, to help buy materials. And I know Councilmember Sweat could contribute to the conversation, but I don't believe they pay any utilities to the city for the use of the space.
That's correct, Harmony. We get a grant through the state for, books and all that stuff. And the library also pays, other than what the city paid for the carpet, when they recarpeted up here with the COVID money, the library tries to pay for everything itself. We're in the process of applying for a Rasmussen grant to redo the main part of the library. Rasmussen grant paid for the downstairs. That was several years ago. I can't remember how many years, but to fix up the Alaska room. And then there's storage in the back where I guess a lot of it is library stuff that, that might be worth a conversation, what to do with those rooms. They do have the potential to be rented out. At least one of them would, for sure. Anyway, that's a
Yeah, the
conversation for
downstairs room
another
you're talking
time.
about?
But in answer to your other question, no, the library does not pay utilities or rent. It's just always been there.
If I may, Mr. Mayor. When speaking with the contractor who originally helped build this building and applied for the grants, and I would have to dig into the history of it a little bit more, but the way it was explained to me is that the building was originally built with a grant from the library. So I don't,
That's correct. I believe
Yeah.
you're correct.
so I don't know if there's language in there or what the stipulations of the grant were, but I do believe that the library had a huge part of the building originally being built. So we could look into that further as well.
Oh, that's great. I'm not looking to nickel and dime the library. I was just wondering how that it was worked in there. But thank you for the history and the answers.
If I could just make one more comment, you have to realize that the library does not generate any income.
Right, that makes sense. It's the library. Thank you, Bobby. I appreciate it.
And that's kind of part of the reason that we were able to do the multi-purpose building as one fund, was because other than a little bit of revenue that we sometimes get from senior meals donations and so on, generally the parts of city government that are operating in or out of this building were all non-revenue generators. And so that was, it actually made it easier to kind of tie things together into a bow here, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's kind of the end of the general revenue section. Any other questions about that before we look at the special revenue funds? Okay. Okay, so looking in special revenue funds, the first one we see is the water special revenue fund. And again, with some of the numbers here, I might have to defer questions to City Manager Friedlander, who did by far the bulk of the work in developing these numbers. But again, part of it is, again, just moving expenses from the general revenue toward the special revenue fund. So basically the parts of the city government that do generate the revenue also can bear a more proportionate portion of the costs. And so that's why you'll see some of these expenses going up. And then obviously as wages and salaries go up, then the benefits go up commensurately. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm scanning the same time you are here.
While the finance officer is scanning, I can just add that a portion of my time, the finance officer's time, and the city clerk's time is put on water and sewer. For FY22, I want to direct both Heidi and Jen's time to help me research and write grants, hopefully multiple, but at least one, to improve the water and or sewer utility systems. And so that's why portions of their time are put on water and on sewer, because they're going to be helping do the heavy lifting that comes with grant writing. And then also there's $2,500 in water and $2,500 in sewer, so that the city could work with a grant writer to assist in giving the city more capacity with grant writing. And so you'll see that under outside labor services, the $2,500 there proposed for FY22 is for a grant writer. And then part of the reason why you see an increase, I'm assuming, in the FY22 proposed for water is because I've changed where some staff time falls so that they can help with our water and sewer systems.
And again, you'll also see the increase in the liability insurance, so that more of that's put toward the areas that actually incur the liabilities. We do have some capital projects here. We are required to do a dam safety inspection, and so that's listed there. And then also the water treatment plants, we know that there are some replacement parts that need to be addressed here soon, and so those are in the capital projects section. And you can see that this is a special revenue fund that we are projecting for FY22 that will be running at a deficit. So that is something to take note of. And one other cost that's been put more toward water and sewer that has not been there in the past is some of the vehicle costs. The public works vehicles have been basically put entirely toward public works, and that's really not an accurate way to picture what they're used for. Their use should more closely resemble the way that the public works staff time is allocated. So obviously, they're spending time going to and from the water treatment plant every day. That induces wear and tear in the vehicles and so on. And so we have pushed some of the vehicle costs toward the special revenue funds to reflect that.
May I ask another question that might be kind of silly, but I'm going to ask it because I think maybe this might be the best place to ask.
Councilmember Payton, what is your question?
Sorry. I was just wondering, as far as the water and sewer goes, as far as our how much money we make off water and sewer, does the city have a fee schedule for buildings that that aren't used most, like HEA charges a minimum per meter. Do we have a fee schedule for that, like a minimum for a structure that is a rental space or a summer home? How are we charging?
Councilmember Payton,
like,
if I may.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, if I may, Mr. Mayor. We used to have, a few years ago, we had a maintenance fee for when people left town. they would pay a flat rate fee through the months where they were not using their service. But I think it was 2 fiscal years ago. I would have to double check again. Council moved to remove that maintenance fee so that the cost of the service is actualized year round. Customers do not get a break for being away from their residence in the winter because their service is still connected to the utility lines and maintenance is still having to be done. The water system is still operating. So people, regardless of their status of actually being here or not, are charged the same rate.
Copy that. That's definitely what I was wondering. Now, what about I don't know if this is a reasonable thing to ask or wonder about. Somebody mentioned the other day the buildings that sit empty throughout the community. And I mean, I didn't have an answer. I had never even thought about, do they pay taxes and stuff, but they don't pay any type of utility on those structures because their utilities are turned off there, correct? That's how that would work itself out.
No, if I may, Mr. Mayor, the buildings, if they are connected to a utility service, they are paying for their utility service, whether they're in use or not.
All right, that makes sense. Okay, thank you. Sorry for dragging that out.
Did anyone have any other particular questions about the water? Section of
Mr.
this
Mayor, if I
report?
may. Jan?
Yep, go ahead, Vivian.
Okay, thank you. With our $50,000 deficit that we're looking at, what was the calculation if we raised the rates that 1.5%? How are we going to adjust this $50,000 deficit? Do we come up with numbers? Did you guys run numbers?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Rojas, you're looking at this difference here, the 52,714. That deficit is with the fee increase.
Oh, boy.
And the reason why it looks so steep is because you have, let's see, you have a decrease in the ferry. So the ferry is then, you know, you're losing a few $1,000s in water to the ferry. You have capital projects that are hitting the water fund at 13,000, and that's split with sewer because you can't have sewer without water. So that's a big expense. You know, you have insurance liability increasing because not just the general fund should take that hit because there's definite liability with running a water treatment plant and all of the water infrastructure and working with property owners on private property with a utility system. So that's why you're seeing the deficit is before those things weren't factored in. So if you look at the expenses for 19 actual, 20 actual, 21 amended, those are some of the reasons why it's gone up so high. And ideally, because with budgets, you try to slightly overestimate expenses and then underestimate revenues, we'll be in better shape as the months go on, but it's best to be conservative. And so, yes, it is looking like the water fund is at a deficit of 50,000. And so council could amend the FY22 fee schedule to increase the water and sewer rates across the board by 3%. The reason why we went with 1.5% is through the analysis that Kevin Schoderman did with Alaska Rural Water. But according to the state, we're a low burden community and we're not charging enough for our water and sewer infrastructure. And council and staff made a great decision to increase the rates and do away with the various classes that someone could be in for utility systems. And I have a chart to show you that you guys made a great decision in doing that to more accurately reflect expenses. to actual costs is, let's see, here's your water special utility fund revenue to expenses comparison. Blue is the expenses and orange is the revenue. And you can see here when the new rates went into effect, you guys did a great job in increasing the revenue for the water utility system. For sewer, it's not as drastic. Granted, the expenses were lower for sewer, and that's partly because we have a sewer utility system that is not as complex as our water system. And I'm assuming in the next few years that's going to change because the system that we have in place isn't the most preferred by the EPA. And so you see your expenses increasing here because capital projects, the lift station pumps, there's reasons where you see the expense here, but for the most part, again, you can see the increase in revenue as a result of the rate changes. So council could say that for FY22, we need to increase the water and sewer rates by 3% instead of 1.5%. And so then that would give you a better margin and decrease that deficit that you're seeing for the budget.
Thank you.
Yeah, Rachel. I guess I'm a little confused. Isn't that one, and I meant to ask it when we were on that water and sewer budget thing. Isn't that 1.5% that the annual thing that we do, the cost of, what's it called? CP, Heidi, what's it called?
CPI increase for
the
consumer
CPI.
price index.
Yeah, is that what this 1.5% is? No, this is extra.
So through the mayor, Councilmember Sweat, I was told that that's how the city developed its budgets in the past. My approach was doing the 3-year average of our actuals. So I didn't take into account the consumer price index. And actually the former city manager, Cassidy Cameron, told me that the index actually decreased this year. So what you have before you for this budget doesn't include that CPI. What instead is used to come up with the expenses is taking FY20 actuals, FY19 actuals, and FY18 actuals, coming up with that 3-year average of what that cost would be, and then meeting with staff to say, hey, does this sound like a reasonable amount to get us through this upcoming year? Or do you think we're going to spend less here or more here? And so the 1.5 increase for revenue for water and sewer rates, that's to account for the cost of aging infrastructure, the increase in material cost for running the water treatment plant. It was just a recommendation made by Kevin, but you guys can go over that.
Oh, okay, yeah, I get that, but we're still doing that other, right? Every annually when we don't increase the water and sewer rates, correct? Goes up annually, because I remember that's what we voted on.
Yes, that's correct. But what she's saying is, so this year, for example, it's decreased. Perhaps we should have either take another look at that and change the language to, with that there's a minimum, there's a floor to that to make sure that it's 1.5, every year, versus taking a hit on the years when it's a decrease. Now, in theory, we would have seen a little bit of savings if there was a decrease. Obviously, we're in a little bit of a jam here. And again, we put a lot of work into this over the last, 3, 4, 5 years on getting our rates. As you can see, we've been above. So we're going to have to take a hard look at this one just because we're reclassifying this. Now, it may be more accurate, which is unfortunate. But I don't think we're going to be able to balance this out on the backs of the citizens in 1 year. And I'd hate to see another thing like we did last time where we did a 10, it was 25%, I think 23% where we did something like that. So this one will probably have to have more discussion. I think everyone's going to know by the time this comes back what we want to do.
Yeah, and I agree with that too. That's why I was a little confused as to what this was, but we definitely have to, I agree with Jeremiah on maybe redoing the wording on that particular issue, since you say it went down, and so we probably should put a minimum on that we need to increase that annually when we don't raise our water and sewer rates. Does that make sense? Okay. And I think we have been doing that annually, correct? Yeah.
Yes, so annually, we've looked at the CPI and made adjustments
Okay.
based on that number. Last year, I think it was 1.4. The year before, it might have been 3. I'd have to look back and see what
Oh,
it
no,
was.
no, I just want to make sure that that's what we're doing.
Yeah, but this
'Cause-
year was a little bit different because potentially it could have been a little bit of a decrease, but we're still in a deficit. So, and some things are being restructured that way, or restructured this way, I should say. So it's a little bit of a different year, but that's something we can look at in the future for sure.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions about the water special revenue fund? Okay.
No, wait.
Okay, so the next one, of course, is the wastewater special revenue fund, and so there's a lot of connections between the two of them, and so you'll see a lot of similar changes with similar explanations. Councilmember Payton, you'll notice here that we do have $1,500 in training in that budget. I believe there was a similar amount in the water training, or the water special revenue fund as well, for training, because that is an area where that's one of the areas where we can improve our best practices scores by having our operators trained as high a level as possible. Of course, it's not just a matter of training, it's also a certain number of hours that they need to put in, and those only happen so quickly. But obviously we want to, whenever they are eligible for the next level of training, we want to move them up, because that does increase our ability to improve our best practices score, which then sets us up for some of that funding that that Steve referenced. Let's see. So again, things are fairly standard here. Again, you'll see the increase in utilities as we put some of those costs more towards special revenue funds. Same thing with insurance as we take them out of, or take some of the burden off of the general fund. Audit fees, on the other hand, we've proposed for that to go down. We're hoping that our overall audit costs are going to be lower this year. That's certainly our goal. And then you'll see the capital projects here, the same ones of the dam safety inspection and the water treatment plant replacement parts. The slough lift station pump, that is probably going to be moved to equipment purchase. We are still kind of looking at that to see when we look at the overall expenses, if that is going to meet the threshold for a capital project or not. And so that needs a little more examination. And again, you're going to see the same net effect of a deficit of just over $51,000 for this special revenue fund. Any questions on the wastewater special revenue fund? Okay. So looking forward at the harbor, which starts on page 48. Here again, you'll see wages and salaries going up a bit. Some of that is going to be related to our police officer, as some of his time is actually allocated to the harbor. And so obviously we didn't have to use that funding in FY21 because of the CARES Act funding. And so in FY22, we are anticipating an increase because of that. Contract services, you'll see where that's gone down considerably. Same thing with outside labor. I believe there was some special circumstances with outside labor in FY20 that we're hoping don't repeat themselves for FY22, or sorry, for FY21, there were some special circumstances. Let's see. You'll see the liability insurance going up from 12,000 to 20,480. Obviously, with the harbor, there is a fair bit of inherent liability there.
And might I add to that? So in addition to regular liability associated with the harbor, there's also marina insurance that the city has to pay. So if you look, insurance liability includes general liability and marina liability, which the marina liability policy on its own is $6,000.
And if you look at the revenues in this, we are anticipating an increase in revenues. Obviously, we're hoping that visitors go up considerably from in FY22 compared to FY21 as we hope the pandemic continues to ease. So that should increase our, especially our transient moorage, stall rental, that type of thing, which is one of the major revenue sources for the harbor. But again, we are looking or anticipating a deficit of just under $27,000 for the year.
And just to add to the finance officer's comment on the deficit, the harbor has been in a deficit, and FY19 was 190,000 basically. And we were able to bring that down to 127. FY21, we're at almost $140,000 deficit, and it's going to increase. And when I spoke with the harbor master, she was amenable to an increase in fees, but she discouraged the consideration of too much because people already feel like the fees at the harbor are high enough. And so I don't know if in the future the city should consider doing a rate study for our fees at the harbor and how they compare to other harbors. But our harbor is operating at a deficit, and it has, through the Denali Commission, it was either in 2010 or 2014, an additional $6 million worth of work that needs to happen in improving the harbor. And something else important to note about the Harbor Special Revenue Fund is that it also accounts for expenses associated with jackaloff. So the harbor is subsidizing the expenses of jackaloff as well. So those are a few things to keep in mind when looking at the increasing deficit. Council decided to go forward with an appraisal for jackaloff tidelands. The appraisal alone is $13,000, so that's reflected in the FY21 amended budget. Initially, I'd recommended to council coding that to the dock, but then I found out from the harbor master that the harbor special revenue fund reflects the expenses of jackaloff. So that's where you'll see under, where is it? Under outside labor services, this $13,000, that's directly tied to jackaloff. So just a few things to keep in mind with the increasing deficit of the harbor.
If I may ask a question, I saw that some of the rates were minimally changed. What dollar value did we increase? What did we get out of that increase in fees in the harbor?
I have that number on a spreadsheet, Councilmember Rojas, that I could follow up and give to you. I'm just making a note here, but okay. It wasn't, I don't believe it was substantial. And then on top of that, similar to when we were having the discussion with the auditor about fund balance, just because we bill out for the harbor you know, $117,000 and mortgage fees doesn't mean we recoup that expense in in the current fiscal year. And so I try to account for that. Let me see if I made a little note. It looks like I did not put a note in here for revenue, but I believe I reduced the revenue by 3%, assuming that we're not going to make the full amount of what we bill out for FY22.
Okay. Mhm. Well, looking at these accounts that are running in the hole, I think it's going to be a bit of a dialogue that we need to be having about how to correct what we've got or somehow get on a correction curve. How we're going to do it, increasing or getting rid of some of what we've got, or the expenses or something. But anyhow, thank you.
Are there any other questions about the boat harbor? Okay, so looking at page 52, the boat haul out and storage special revenue fund. You can see that this again is running fairly close to previous years. Little increase in operating supplies, outside labor. We do anticipate potentially some equipment purchases there. The main change in this is asking the special revenue fund once again to bear a little larger part of the burden of the insurance for liability and then also for the audit. Obviously, our special revenue funds get looked at pretty carefully in the audit process, and so it seems only fair to give them more of the costs of doing that. In terms of revenue, we're looking at anticipating a bit of an increase from about $30,650, about a $4,900 increase there. But overall, still looking at a bit of a deficit of about just under $17,000 for boat haul out.
And just to add to the what the finance officer said, the reason why we have outside labor increase is because the city currently does not charge for the use of electricity out at the boat harbor because we have, I think it's just a couple pedestals out there that people plug into. And so essentially the users are not paying for the electricity. And so the outside labor service is to have the city electrician look at and hopefully fix or improve that situation so that we can charge users for the use of the electricity.
Excuse me, this is at the boat storage yard? Where, is that right? Or where at the boat haul out, or where are we talking about? The electrical fee?
Through the mayor, yes, Councilmember Rojas, it's the boat haul out and storage yard.
Oh, because I thought in one of our, like in the last couple of years, I thought we had a direction to the city manager that we somehow try to recoup any electricity by a flat rate fee in the harbor, into the boat haul out and the boat storage area. My mistake if we didn't go through with that.
Through the mayor, I don't think that went into effect. I don't think it's reflected in the fee schedule either. And I think it's just because there isn't a way, kind of like the multi-purpose building, there isn't really a way to suss out who's using what.
Right, right. Well, I think that's where our conversations need to go. If we're trying to gain revenue, and obviously we need to find some revenue, we just need to come up with some flat rates in fairness to the city. Even if we can't move forward because we have no definitive numbers to work with, I think we just need to adjust our business by having some flat rates and moving forward with collecting some revenue.
And if I'm just looking at the fee schedule here, looking at the boat haul out and boat storage, yeah, I do not see any reference to charging of electricity. That's on page 127 in your packet. And it does not say that in there.
Thank you for looking that up.
Is that, is the electrical fee maybe in the space lease contract, or? Because it seems like I've talked to a few people that said they pay a fee for their power over there. Had I have known that, maybe I'd have a couple of freezers plugged in. I live right beside it.
I was going to say,
But I was under the impression that they were getting charged at somehow.
Through the mayor, Councilmember Morrison, I've been told that they haven't. We should look at the user agreement just to be 100,000% certain, but I've been told that we haven't been charging, and that's because there's a issue with who's using what in the pedestal. So I hope we can fix that this summer.
I thought that was determined by, they would go to the city office and ask, and it would be switched on. I know they have meter loops over there, or meters that are around that place, I thought. And just an assumption on my part, you know what that makes us. So.
And through the mayor, I did have the former city manager tell me that that was something she would love to see happen for the city, is fix the electricity use issue out at the boat harbor, or boat haul out.
Mr. Mayor, yeah, I don't think you can flat rate an electric bill into the boatyard. Is not everybody in there will be able to have electricity at the same time. You'll be charging people for something you're not providing. So it's spend the money to get an electrical outlet to every boat in there, or you have to turn them all off and charge people individually that do use it. But I thought it was in when they leased the space, if they had electricity and use it, I know a couple did, that they actually paid electricity. That was years ago. Thank you.
Yeah, I cannot speak to the past through the mayor, but currently we are not charging in the boatyard we do in the harbor, but not in the boatyard. The boatyard is strictly basically the length of the vessel, and then if it adds to the length and the length of the trailer as well. So it's strictly the amount of space that they are using. So.
Somebody dropped the ball.
Any other questions? Do you have any other questions about the boat haul out?
Yeah, I got one, maybe a suggestion. And I think I've brought this up before in here, to maybe straighten that electrical out, run some water lines and some septic lines around there, and turn that into an RV park in the summertime. I think would be a pretty good bunch of revenue. The RV park that we have now is out of town. People come across in their big Winnebagos or RVs, and they have to use them to get to town unless they bring another vehicle. Our dump station's right there, and sewer line is right there. I think for an expense to tap into that and run septic lines to each one of them sites, take all them derelict boats, move them up to one end, and make a RV park, I think would be pretty lucrative little business. Thanks.
Okay. Do you have any other questions about the boat haul out and storage yard? Okay. So looking at the municipal dock, as you know, most of our revenue for the dock is tied to the Alaska Marine Highway system. We also receive some revenue from crane use, etc. Once again, not to sound like a broken record here, but you will see an increase to the dock in terms of the audit fees, as well as insurance and liability. Part of Chief Cushman's time is also allocated to the dock. So that's an expense in FY22 that we didn't have in 21, thanks to the CARES Act funding. We are anticipating an increase in the number of ferry stops in FY22. So I guess cross our fingers and hope that the Testy stays in good shape. um, uh, I know the legislature is looking at some more forward funding of the ferry that will hopefully make that a little bit more stable in its process, or give a little more forewarning should the ferry service be pulled, which shouldn't happen on quite such a short notice as it has in the past. So that should help us going forward with that revenue. We're anticipating a little bit of a decrease in ferry wages, and so looking at overall a revenue increase of from 36,000 to 43,000. So approximately $7,000 increase. But again, once again, operating at an overall deficit of about $35,000.
And to add to the finance officer, this is the special revenue fund where the auditors had to change the inflated revenue, where basically we double dipped and counted revenue twice. And so that's where you see the prior period adjustment of minus $157,000.
Have any questions about the doc? The next one is going to be kind of a new one for you, the the senior meals special revenue fund. Obviously, this is primarily funded with grants from the state and also from the borough. The state gives us approximately $35,000, and then the borough gives us a little less than $11,000. And then we are required to match, we don't have to match the borough funds, but we do need to match the state funds with a minimum of 10%. And so for here, this is one of those times where we actually know generally what our revenues are going to be. We don't have to forecast quite so much because it is a grant. And so if you look on the second page, really the only thing that's a little bit unknown is it's listed here as charges for services. And what that is donations. We request meal recipients to give a donation of $5 per meal. We do not require it. But we do have that as a source of revenue as well. And so, and the other thing that's unusual about this is that in the past, all of the grant funds have gone toward wages and salaries and supplies. And then starting last year, and they're doing it again for FY22, the state has also given us a chunk of money, $4,000 to $5,000, that is an increase due to the recognized increase in expenses related to COVID. It's changed some of the ways in which we deliver meals. But it's up to us how we allocate that. And so we've allocated some of that to supplies because obviously having to purchase to-go containers for every meal has increased our supply costs. But then we have also put some of those funds, I believe it's $2,000, we've put toward facility here. And so that is one way in that one of the users of the building is helping us recoup a little bit of the utility costs is through the senior meals program. Any questions about senior meals? And so this is one of those funds, like I said, because it is grant funding, we are obligated to spend all that funding and then have our match on top of that. So it's not an area that we're going to recognize a lot of revenue, but generally we have seen those donations. And then we also get what's called NSIP payments. Basically, the state pays us 70 cents per meal on top of the grant funding for every qualified recipient that we serve. And so between those two things, we generally do approximately break even on senior meals, even accounting for the 10% match. The next one is another one that has not been in here before. The cemetery special revenue fund. We did create in the amended budget some funding for that, and then we've got some in the FY22 budget as well for some equipment, and a little bit of freight. And I think the city manager can speak to this one better than I can. Obviously, I think we've all received the good news about the Rasmussen grant of $10,000+ to put toward the cemetery. So that's a bit of good news related to revenue for this project as well.
Through the mayor, Soldovia Council will be seeing on your May 10th meeting a resolution to accept the grant funds from Rasmussen. Radzi was instrumental in helping the city get that grant. And we originally requested $21,880 and we received half of it. And so the Soldovia Cemetery Committee can assist in determining the purchase priority, but we have to use the funds for what they were requested. And so even if we end up having some staff time out there, we can't use the grant funds for staff time. It has to be purely for what the grant said the uses were for.
So that's the end of the special revenue funds. Any questions about those? Okay. I see we're coming up to getting close to 7 o'clock here, so I'm going to turn it back to City Manager Friedlander.
Thank you, Jan. And so just to wrap things up, so you saw in the water and sewer special revenue funds, the reference to capital projects. So this part of your budget document, starting on page 63, just goes over those capital projects in a little bit more detail. So you can see the project name, the need, the cost estimates, and the funding source. And then on the second page, these are the two capital projects that council could consider funding through the community assistance program funding, unless you want to use all of the community assistance funding to balance the general fund out. I do have, I think, a memo in here on page, let's see, page 119 that talks about the capital or the community assistance funds, and the legislature has fully recapitalized it. So there's a good chance that we're going to receive the full $76,000, but as a baby step, we could try to balance our budget without that full amount, but council could make the determination and risk to use that full amount to help us offset the $51,000 deficit in the general fund if you would like. And so the capital projects fund, and then we can save this for you guys for reading material later, but also included in your budget document is an inventory of most of our public facilities and capital assets. Also included is an inventory on our fleet and equipment. And then there's another list that's acquisition considerations. And so these hopefully will be published in every budget document in the future. I recommend council always request that this is put in the budget. It's basically giving council an observation or a bird's eye view, as well as the public, a bird's eye view of the status of our public facilities and fleet items, kind of like what the auditor Steve was referencing and what I hinted on, discussed on a depreciation, how our assets were valued at 22 million and now they're at 11 million. When you look through these inventories, you can see that staff have rated a lot of the items as fair or poor. And so hopefully this inventory developed over time will encourage better budgeting and savings to help take care of all of our equipment. And then just gonna scroll through all of those lists. The city clerk did an excellent job in helping prepare not only the cover sheets for all of the departments that discusses the performance measures, but also helped in coming up with definitions so that if later on you're like, what did admin fees mean again? There's a definition there provided for you. So we have definitions for expenses, revenues, and then general governmental definitions. So hopefully that can be a resource for you guys. And then I'm just going to scroll down here because I think there was one chart I wanted to make sure we saw before the close of the work session, which is this is a comparison of the funds that the city has across a few years. So the blue line is FY19 actual, and this is on this is on page 97 of your budget document. So what you have before you, the blue line is FY19 actual, orange is FY20 actual, gray is FY21 amended, and yellow is FY22 proposed. So this is, I hope this just gives you a bird's eye view of how we're doing compared to the past few fiscal years. So of course, something like senior meals, we haven't really had that much of a change. But for the special revenue funds, particularly the boat haul out and the dock, they're helping pay for liability insurance and our audit fees, which they haven't done as significantly in the past. And then in water and sewer, we have capital projects as well as more staff time budgeted to them. And then the harbor looks like it's just slightly over the expenses that the city saw in FY19. And then for the general fund, it looks like we're below the expenditures that we've seen for FY21, 20, and 19. So just another way to view the budget document. And let's see. And then this is another perspective as well. The next page, which just shows expenses by fund type. So it gives you a perspective of how much the general fund makes up of our over $1 million budget, expense budget. The water revenue fund coming in second place, wastewater coming in third, and so on. Oh, and sorry, there's the boat harbor. How could you forget that? So general fund, water, and then the boat harbor. And then this next graph here is incorrect. I'm sorry, it looks like SPD is 34% of our budget. That is not the case. If you want an accurate pie chart for a general fund, just go back to the beginning of the budget. This is a more accurate portrayal of general fund expenses so that you can see what makes up the bulk of operating the general fund. And with that, there were a lot of other topics to discuss. And so if council would like to have another work session next week, we'd be more than happy to make that happen. Otherwise, we do need to have a FY22 budget introduced the first meeting of May. And I wanted to share with council that I do believe this budget to be unsustainable. It is not unrealistic, though. If you look at what the city has spent for the past 10 years, what is proposed to you is actually fiscally responsible and conservative. However, we don't have the funds to support the budget that we've been operating on for the past decade. And so if this budget is adopted as proposed, staff will work on amendments to the budget to propose to council for consideration over the next few months so that we can try and have a better control of our expenses. So that is an option as well.
All right, well, that was a lot of information. You guys actually put that together pretty well this year. I like the new format. It's pretty clear on revenue versus expenses, shows the deficit, the fund balance, the fund balances, and either the increase or decrease. So it's pretty straightforward. I guess now it's going to be in council's court to decide what we want to do going forward here. It may be, I'm open to suggestions. It may be a good idea if we want to have one more work session next week to at least start talking about some of the ideas, because what we're going to have to do then is at the first meeting in May, or either going to have amendments at that meeting, or if we have a work session next week, since this is just a draft budget, the city administration could take some of those suggestions and try to incorporate them into the proposed budget that we're going to introduce at the first meeting. Any preferences from anybody on which way we're going to go?
I'd like to have another meeting.
Well, I'd like to see us have another meeting, another workshop.
I would be okay with another meeting
Okay.
too.
Okay. Yeah, I think that one we'll have to drill right into the nuts and bolts of it. Now that we've seen the numbers and where we're at. So, Heidi and Rachel, if you guys want to work with council to try to come up with a day that works for everybody, and then we can try to do the same thing, just drill in and see if anyone has individual suggestions on what they'd like to see in terms of changes, or if there's any kind of agreement that we should, if we want to just leave it as proposed.
Mr. Mayor, if I may,
Go ahead.
I suggest that council, if Ms. Friedlander is ready at that time, looks at having a meeting either Monday or Tuesday at the latest, knowing that the packet goes out Wednesday and there's a planning commission Wednesday night. The meeting could come later on in the week, and the budget and ordinance could be put in the laydown for Monday, for the following Monday's meeting. But for consistency's sake, if it works for City Manager Friedlander and the council, I would suggest trying to have it earlier in the week.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I could just say, I won't be available until either the 6th or the 7th of May. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th I'm not available. Just a heads up.
Okay. We look at calendar here real quick.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I may ask, if the council does not have any input right now, we pass this budget, which if it gets passed, then we're looking at, as our city manager said, we look at adjusting it to balance it in some way.
Looking at the mid-year
Yeah,
adjustment.
yeah.
Correct.
Right. Okay, so unless there's any big, huge things that we need to do or questions to be answered, passing it and then amending it just because the situation the budget is in right now based on our situation. Just need to clarify.
Yep. Rachel, you want to take a stab at that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So through the Mayor, Councilmember Rojas, that's completely correct. We can amend certain but not all things. Like, for example, the one guaranteed revenue source that council could make a proposal to change is the mill rate. Same thing with sales tax. Sales tax, if you propose changing it, it takes at least 3 months to go into effect. So I would think that if you want to leave expenses as is, we can totally amend those. We have control over those. But the revenue side of things, it's better to do that now versus waiting. So if, for example, you wanted to change the water and sewer rates from 1.5%, and I can try and come up with I will come up with a chart to show you what they could look like and what revenue that could generate for water and sewer. This would be the time to do that, is to focus your work session efforts on amending fee schedules and thinking about revenue sources, and whether or not you would want 100% of the community assistance funds to go towards balancing out the general fund or other special revenue funds, or if you want to leave that revenue for capital projects such as Jackaloff and road maintenance in the greater.
Okay.
So
Go ahead, Vivian.
I was just going to say, then that just makes it clear to me that we do need to meet. And I would ask the staff, Mr. Mayor, if they would bring forward what the things are that the city, the council can actually change and do at this time before we move forward.
Yeah, and I think, listen, seeing what we saw tonight, looking at, the water, sewer, harbor, dock funds, those are all critical, obviously. Again, I don't know if we can, fix it overnight, but those are going to need some more discussion. I think we could probably, narrow it down, take a look at the fee schedule, like you say, have a few proposals for council to consider. And then on the revenue side of things, obviously outside of mill rate, sales tax, anything like that, that's going to take quite a while to enact. So if you guys are you good with that, Rachel? If we maybe set it up, I know Vivian won't be available, but like you say, maybe we do it on Tuesday or something, and then try to just narrow it down to a couple hours, and then to a couple of those specifics on those certain funds.
We will make it work. We will do the best we can. And I just wanted to remind council of a couple things. So the budget is developed to the best of our abilities, and I hope that it's not 100% correct and that we over exceed our revenue predictions and overestimated our expenses. So therefore our expenses are less. So just keep that in mind too, is that we'll know a lot more about the status of the city a few months into the game. Versus how we're feeling right now, which it does look pretty bleak. But again, it's just a conservative, slight overestimation of expenses and a slight underestimation of revenue. So just keep that in mind. And then, oh my gosh, I just lost the second train of thought. Oh, next year will be different. Like I said in the beginning, I've only been here for under 4.5 months. And so I hope that for FY23, we'll have more time to have better discussions about how to preserve the financial integrity of the city.
Thank you. And I think, yeah, those comments are, fair in terms of taking a realistic, conservative approach to developing the budget. I don't think we have any other choice. We don't want to certainly predicate our budget on pipe dreams. We need to be realistic and conservative, and then hope a few things come to fruition. So, all right. Well, any other closing comments from anyone?
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yep, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to thank the staff. You did a fabulous job. I really appreciate what was presented in front of us, and we have a challenge, but I'm sure we can handle it. Thank you so much, staff and council.
Thank you, Vivian. Anyone else?
Yeah, I want to make
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
comment.
Yep. Go ahead, Bobby.
Yeah, I want to also thank the staff. Gosh, you guys it's overwhelming for me, but you guys did a terrific job. So are we going to have another work session next week then? Is that what was decided?
Yeah, I think on Tuesday is the plan.
Okay. Thanks.
Harmony, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Vivian and Bobby said, and thank the staff for the comprehensive look into our bleak future. And am available for the upcoming work session.
Okay, thank you, Harmony. Okay, any final other comments?
Mayor, if I may, I just wanted to applaud our finance officer, Jen Yeager, for her first undertaking of the city budget, as well as our city clerk and soon to be, with council's approval, city clerk and special projects and communications coordinator. Couldn't have done it without them, as well as the rest of the staff were very helpful in preparing this document for council. So just wanted to give a shout out to staff too.
Yeah, thank you, and that's much appreciated. And I know you also worked countless hours over the last number of weeks on your weekends and stuff trying to get this knocked out. So much appreciated on all everyone on staff that helped prepare the budget documents. So much appreciated. And I guess if there's no other closing comments, we'll go ahead and end our work session for this evening, and then look for some information on another work session on Tuesday. Yep, go ahead, Heidi.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, does 4 p.m. still work for everybody? And I can start sending out information here since it's getting towards the end of the week. Just 4 p.m. Tuesday.
What works for me?
I'll call you, Mr. Morrison.
Okay, thanks, everyone. That'll go ahead and conclude our work session tonight. And we'll stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.